Hi, this is Christina Welsh, co-screenwriter of Addicted, and you're listening to Talk with Taj.
Welcome, everybody, to another special edition of the Talk with Taj show. Log on to the official website at talkwithtaj.com for this interview and more. My guest now on the line is co-writer, screenwriter for the movie Addicted. Welcome to the show, Christina Welsh. How you doing?
I'm doing fine, thanks. Thanks for having me on the show, Taj. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great, better than ever.
Great. Good. Glad to hear it.
Yes, before you got into screenwriting, you were in radio.
Yes, I was.
Tell us about your experience in radio and what inspired you to transition from that to screenwriting.
Well, I was an entertainment reporter on Power 106 FM in Los Angeles, which at the time in the late 80s, early 90s was the #1 radio station in LA, and I did live reports on Friday and Saturday night. On the hour, every hour, we would drive around. We'd do Man on the Street. We'd interview people coming out of movies, and then on the flip side, we would do cover the Oscars and interview stars at the Golden Globe Awards, the Grammys. So we covered the full spectrum of entertainment. I did that for about 4 years, every weekend, every Friday and Saturday night. And I loved it. And the great thing about that is it did involve writing. I'd have to get to where I was going. I'd take down information. I'd write up my report, and then I'd do my 1-minute report. So there was writing involved in that, just a very different kind of writing than screenwriting. But, I enjoyed it, and I think a lot of the times I was going out saying, I'm covering entertainment, but I want to sort of be part of it. I'd like to, kind of be the person putting the entertainment up that's covered. So that's kind of where that came from.
Now, how has that changed, though? Because you said you was out there on the streets from Friday nights and Saturday nights covering events, getting people that came out of movies, and you did your report. How has that changed now? Because Hollywood is totally different now from back then.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to try that kind of a job now. I mean, it's everybody's doing their own thing on social media, so it might be a little different now. The people I interviewed about the movies might have their own website now talking about movies. So, a little bit, sometimes back then in radio, you're more of the only game in town. So I think it's changed in that respect. But I think the studios, listen, they love blogs. They love shows like yours. They love the entrepreneurial people putting their own stuff out on the web and, on the internet for people to listen to, because it's putting the word out for their movies. Word of mouth is always the way that movies get their audiences. So, good reviews help, but also just the fans talking about the movie on Twitter, on the internet, on blogs, on podcasts, all of that. So it has changed, but I think there are more opportunities for the word to get out to people. And probably the word to get out that a movie's bad and they should stay away, too, so that's kind of interesting.
Yeah. In screenwriting, you also mentioned that when you was out there reporting that was a different type of writing. What's the difference in the writing styles from when you were out there doing the street reporting versus what you're doing now in writing movies?
Well, the reporting that I would do would be strictly taking down the facts, but interpreting them in an entertaining way so that I could tell people what's going on or what's happening, being informative and factual. So that's the difference. In screenwriting, of course, you're making up a world. Now, of course, Zane wrote the book Addicted, and I was adapting a world that she created, but it's still fictional. So that's the difference to me, is that you're reporting what you see, and you have to give the facts. You can't make things up, but you do try to present it in an entertaining way. And then with a feature film, you're just making up a world of characters that could come from your own imagination or from the imagination of Zane, if it turns out.
Now, how did you hook up with Zane? How did that all come about where you guys were able to connect and come up with this idea for Addicted?
Well, she wrote the book, self-published, and it became so successful it was picked up by Simon & Schuster and was officially published, and then became a best-selling book on the New York Times bestseller list. And Lionsgate Studios, the studio that made the film and released it, got the rights to the book, and they put out the call industry-wide for a screenwriter to adapt the book. So I was one of many people, many writers being submitted by my agents. So I read the book, loved it, definitely wanted this assignment. I was called in twice. I had to come in with my 30 minutes of how I would turn this great book into an exciting movie, because the book is 325 pages, and you have to come up with a 110-page screenplay. So there's a lot you have to leave out, but then you have to say, how do I present the best of what's in this book and help make it a great movie? So I went in, I did my thing. I never actually met Zane until the premiere in New York a few weeks back. Which was amazing to think we'd never met in person, but she was always accessible through email and phone during the process of when I was writing the script. But how I got the job was I just presented it a couple of times. Had a couple of meetings with the studio. Zane was part of the team that selected me, and in those meetings, she was never physically present because she lived back east, and this is in Los Angeles. But she was always present via speakerphone in the center of the conference table. So we would every once in a while hear Zane, come out from the speakerphone and give her thoughts on what I was saying and her reaction to my ideas. And so I was hoping I was impressing her with how I would take her baby and raise it into a movie, and she liked it. So ultimately they chose me to adapt the book. That was Zane and the producers and the studio. So they were all a part of the team that selected me. Zane very much had a say in that. So I'm very, very proud and honored that she liked my work, liked my take on things, and she was very supportive through the process of when I wrote the script.
Can you walk us through how you put this idea together? Like, what was the thought process on how how the beginning should go, how the middle, and then how it should end? Because you did say it was 325 pages, and you had to try to extend that, but like you said, it leaves some things out. So what was the challenges that you had in trying to accomplish that, and also how did you know this would be the best way to go?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because it was. I would say the very first thing I did when I got this job was celebrate, and the next day I spent a week probably panicking, thinking, oh my God, what have I gotten myself into? I went in and was very passionate about wanting this job, and then I got it and went, wow, I hope I can deliver. So I think, as you mentioned, the difference in length between the book and the script, you do have to go through, or I went through, and had to look and say, what do I love about this? What is absolutely essential in my mind that needs to stay? And what can we lose? And I think for me, and ultimately for the producing team in the studio, including Zane, it was important to tell the present-day story of Zoe. I mean, this is a story that spans 20 years in the lead character's life. The book starts out when she's 10 and ends up when she's 30. So we had to say, well, we can't do that. This is not a mini-series. This is not a television series. We have an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes to tell this woman's story. So we had to lose a lot of that early childhood stuff, which I loved. I mean, I loved some of those great childhood scenes. We had to just very much concentrate on the present-day story. This is a woman who's happily married, has a successful business, has 2 beautiful children, the perfect husband, and she's unhappy and unsatisfied. And she strays, has an affair, and unleashes this addiction that moves beyond an affair with one guy and into a sex addiction with other people, and a lifestyle and a behavior that becomes very, very destructive to herself and her business and her family and her life. So that was very important to say, this is the story of this woman, this journey from this very respectable woman descending into the sex addiction and ultimately finding out what caused this addiction. So I guess, it's funny because I've written a lot of original screenplays, and I look at that like a painting. You're starting with a blank canvas and you're making things up and putting it on a canvas. And I think adapting a book is more like sculpting. You're starting with a block of clay. You're starting with something that's already there, and you're chipping away to create something different. And I think that's what this book was to me, is like, okay, we've got to just keep the central story. We've got to keep what's there, and what can we lose, what can we lose, what can we lose? And it's heartbreaking sometimes to see some great moments leave and some great scenes and some great characters, but you can't, put up a 6-hour movie. Nobody's going to sit there in a theater for 6 hours. So that was my process, was to just map out. I said, okay, there's a 3-act structure in screenplays: first act, second act, third act, and it was really to map out, okay, what happens in that first act, what happens next, what happens in that third act, and what's the finale. And then, you start out with too much, and then you whittle away at what you don't need anymore. And that's really a lot of it. Writing is editing. Writing is rewriting, and it's very challenging. So I gave myself room to include a lot of things in my very first draft, and then I would read it and say, okay, we don't need this, or these 3 scenes repeat this one idea, so I can just get away with 1 scene. So really, I didn't start knowing exactly how it would turn out. I think I wrote everything that I could and then whittled away from there. And the studio gave great notes and Zane gave great feedback about what she was okay with losing and what she absolutely thought was essential, and that was important to me, that she be happy with the final product.
For people that's listening who want to be screenwriters or people who are already in that field, how long did it take you to write this and rewrite this? Because this has to be very time-consuming.
Yes, it was. I actually, per my contract, I had 12 weeks to come up with that first draft, which seems like a lot of time, but it's really not. It's a little under 3 months, and if you're thinking about a lot of the writing is trying to figure out, it's solving a puzzle, how you're going to tell this story in the best possible way, including the best possible scenes, and not lose anything that's great, but also know when you have to get rid of the good stuff to get to the meat of the story. So that was very challenging.
Is it easier to write from something like you said, the book, or is it easier to just create something that you can just work from scratch?
I think they both have their challenges. I think if you, my first movie was If Only, which starred Jennifer Love Hewitt and Tom Wilkinson, and that was, that was my original idea, my original screenplay, and it was an idea that just kind of came to me, and I just wrote it down, like my 5 lines of what that movie was about, and then I kept working from there. So that was sort of a bit of inspiration, and then you have to work out all the beats, all the scenes, where does the story go from A to Z to the very end. And with a book, of course, you're starting with all of that in place. So it's basically having to get rid of things, but still tell that story, that essential story, that core story that everybody loves from the book. So I think they both have their challenges. I think if you get that bit of inspiration with an original idea, you can just flow and just come out of you uncensored, and you're not worrying about, oh, what's the author going to think, or I hope we can lose this scene, or I hope this is all right. You just get to just let it all pour out, and that's the fun part. That's probably the most fun you can have writing, is just your own original idea that you're just flying with it, you're just enjoying, and it's just coming out, and you're not worrying about answering to anybody, you're just writing your heart out. And then you look at it later and say, okay, I can lose this, or this can go, and this didn't work out so well, but just in that moment, it's a great moment to be in. I really enjoyed adapting Addicted, though, because that was my first real assignment, adapting a book, and I learned so much from the process. It was a lot more collaborative. Usually when you're writing an original screenplay, you're just kind of by yourself. But this process, I already had a book, so I already had a world handed to me, and it was up to me to bring it to life in a screenplay format.